Here we go. Please remember to mute your line. So we want to welcome you to the IDA Maintenance of Effort presented by the Office of Special Education Finance and Budget Division. Looks as though I was muted, so I'm going to start one more time. Welcome to the IDA Maintenance of Effort Office of Special Education Finance and Budget presentation. We are a division of the Special Education and Student Services at the Virginia Department of Education. These are our staff members. The Office of Special Education Finance and Budget, often referred to as the FAB team, is responsible for assisting, monitoring, and managing the Federal IDA Division Maintenance of Effort submission. Many of you, I'm sure, have spoken to our staff members. We'd like to let you know that recently Ella Barnes has retired and her position will be replaced. But all of us that you see on the screen remain of service to you. Today, our specialist, Shalonda Lewis, is the financial data specialist of the FAB team that oversees the LEA maintenance of MOE. Annually, she works to ensure that school divisions categorize expenditures correctly and use exceptions when needed. She assists school divisions, special ed directors, and the finance office personnel to understand the regulations and to manage local and state funds separate from federal dollars. If you have any questions, please send them to the FAB office email at sped-finance@doe.virginia.gov with MOE in the subject line. Shalonda or someone from our office will respond as soon as possible to your questions. So what you'll see here today is we're going to do another Gauge Your Understanding poll time. We have a poll to look at what information you are aware of and what things we may need to specifically address throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation today, we will also have another poll to gain hopefully all your increased information. So allow me to pull up the poll, and I'm launching it. You should be able to see it in just a moment. Please let me know, somebody, if you see it. I see we are beginning to get some results, which are fantastic. There's only 5 questions, so if everybody would be willing to participate, that would really be helpful. I understand now we have about 118 participants. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time to take this poll, as it gives us some things to focus on. These are considered the highlights of the outlines and structure for knowing what to do to get started on MOE. And so it's real important for us to know that you know the structure and the first steps to take in completing your MOE submission. Looks like we're getting up there, and we have about 73% of people that have participated. We're still getting some scores in. We have 71% of the 115 participants that have participated and completed the poll. Kind of stuck at 85. If we could get up to 90, that would be so wonderful. So if you could take a second just to answer these 5 questions, and then we'll review them. I like people's honesty. I am new. I have no clue. Thank you. We are here to help you and want to be of help because we want you to get this right. Okay. A few more people have came on. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. Looks like we're standing still at about 75% of people participating. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now. We made it to 74. Okay. Here are our results. So our first question, maintenance of effort has an eligibility and compliance requirement. Okay, so 73 out of 87 that participated got that right. There are 2 requirements in MOE. Maintenance of effort includes, you're correct, incorrect. It includes only state and local expenses. It does not involve federal, state, and local expenses. That's an important, very important aspect to remember of this. You're only looking at state and local dollars when you measure up expenditures in doing your MOE, when you categorize them and add them up. What, let me see, I went too far. I didn't go far enough. Here we go. What can contribute to a decrease? Well, I keep losing that. What can contribute to a decrease in MOE expenses? Most folks got that right. It is all of the above. The 4th question, in my division, the following people work on submitting MOE. That's fantastic. We think all the all SPED folks that are involved in this, the SPED director and their staff and the finance and accounting people need to collaborate in order to make this accurate upon their submission. And thank you again for the person who said they have no clue. Give us a call. We will help you. And didn't you attend or view the Help I May Not Meet MOE webinar? No, but somebody watched it. So we've done pretty good. We have 48% of our people said no, they have not been able to see it. For your information, it is on our website. So after we finish the presentation, if you'd like to take a look at it, it is available for you on our website in the budget and funding SPED webpage. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll now, and I'd like for you to remember these questions because you'll be asked things that are similar in the end, and see if we could get 100% correct. Okay. So this session is intended to support school division personnel in understanding LEA MOE requirements, practices, and data submission. That includes reviewing briefly the 2 MOE standards, eligibility and compliance that schools must be maintained, examining in detail the compliance standard, reviewing allowable and non-allowable local or state expenditures, and review the 4 methods to calculate the compliance standard, and also to review allowable exceptions and unfortunately discussing when school divisions are in non-compliance. As you can see, we have divided the presentation today into sections. For your reference, at the end of each section is the slides that pertain to those particular sections. So as we proceed, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Shalonda Lewis, our expert in the field, and Shalonda will take it from here. Shalonda, are you ready?
I am ready. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone can hear me nice and strong. I want to make sure you don't miss anything, but after looking through some of those questions, I'm pretty confident I might not be needed very much this afternoon. I saw a lot of good scores. So thank you. And I will try to touch on those couple of things where I saw we could improve our scores. So again, good afternoon, and we're ready to jump right to the next section. Well, our section number 1, overview, MOE overview. Let's go ahead and switch to the slide. And I think that Joanne has already stated that we will be sending this out, so don't feel the need to try to capture every little thing. We will send out the presentation, and the presentation might even come before the video. But let us know if you have any questions. Like she said, put it in the chat. So MOE, why is it required and what does it mean? Simply put, maintenance of effort was required to ensure that LEAs do not simply replace state and local funding with federal funding. So we don't want you to just use the federal dollars. We want to make sure that at the local and state level that we are using those funds and it's not just being replaced with federal funds. Now, there are 2 pieces or components, shall I say, to MOE. The first part of it deals with the budget. And that part takes place around the springtime when you work on your applications. And that deals with the fact that we want you to budget as much as you expended the most recent time that you met MOE. That's not always the prior year, but that's the budget side. The second part is where we are today, and it deals with, and let me back up. I'm sorry, the budget side, and that deals with eligibility standard. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. So the eligibility standard deals with budgeting. The other side, the other component deals with the spending. That's where we are today. That's what we're going to focus mostly on today. And it's focused on you spending as much as the last time your division met its MOE requirement. And this is called the compliance standard. So let's take a look at this in a different viewpoint. Next slide. So here's a better view of it. So on the left side, we have the eligibility standard. And this is what we do again in the spring to make sure that you actually can receive your IDA Part B allocations. You need to meet this standard. Now, you must budget as much as what you've spent in the last time you met MOE. So that's going to be the last, like this last time we did it was in this year, and we had 1920 data to look at as we planned for our upcoming year, which was 21-22. And like I said, this is completed during the application process. Now let's look at the compliance standard. This deals with the spending side. This is where we are today. We're looking at what we spent in 21-22. This also is based upon a comparison of 2 years. We're looking at what happened this year against what happened against the last time we met. This is information. Expenditures are based upon the state fiscal year, and this will be due in January, the end of January. Now, both of the eligibility and the eligibility and the compliance standard are both looked at by using 4 tests. Those tests we will discuss next. Next slide. So the 4 tests deal with local funds. The second test is state and local funds. Now, when we're talking about this, we're again talking about what we spent when we're talking about the compliance. When we're talking about the eligibility side, we're talking about what we're planning to budget for, but we're referencing back to the last time we spent. The last two tests, the third and fourth, deal with per capita. Per capita deals with per child. And that is calculated by simply looking at, like for number 3, we would take the total local funds and divide it by our child count, our eligible students, and we would get the per child amount. We would do this for 3 and for 4. And we can definitely look at that more. But what I want you to also realize is when we talk about these 4 methods of calculations, we also refer to them in the 4 tests. You only need to meet 1 test to meet maintenance of effort. You do not have to meet all 4 or pass all 4. You only need to meet 1. Go ahead, next slide. So let's quickly check our understanding. I personally like this slide because I think it brings it all together. So you have the 2 standards that you have to meet. One deals with budgeting, one deals with spending, but they are connected by those same 4 tests or 4 calculation methods that we're going to look at. We're just going to look at the eligibility when we're in the planning process and around springtime or April, May, and we're going to look at the compliance side now in December. And that's where the rest of this presentation will go. Next slide. Compliance standard. The meat and potatoes. We have quite a bit to cover in this section. So let's go ahead and get started right away. Overarching today, I want you all to realize the question is, did the school spend enough using state or local or state plus local to meet MOE? That's the bottom line question that most of you are trying to answer today so that you can submit it to the VDOE. Next slide. So with this, and as we're going through this section, I want you to take away several things, but I want you to also know that there's a lot of information, but focus on the following. 1, the importance of collaboration. We're going to talk about accurately capturing and reporting expenditures, the importance of maintaining documentation, and if you need to use allowable exceptions, when do you do it and how do you do it? So if you can get those 4 things, we're going to be right on track. So let's talk about collaboration. When we think about collaboration right now, we're really talking about the finance and or accounting and special ed departments. Please understand that we know that we can't make you all work together. But what we want to express is that we have spoken with several divisions, and we know the breakdown in accurate reporting, timely reporting is a lot to do with the collaboration between the 2 departments. So we just kind of want to highlight and discuss that a little bit as why that's a win for all. Next slide. So sharing information in order to categorize expenses, that's going to be important. Making sure that you're able to accurately report expenditures, that is going to be important. You're going to need that for the maintenance of effort. In order to meet MOE, if you all don't work together, the first 2 things will fall apart. And that is what we want to make sure, that you're at the end of the day, you're able to meet MOE's compliance standards, and to last, avoid being in non-compliance and returning funds back to the federal government. Next slide. So collaboration is necessary. Again, we're going to make sure you guys really can kind of see the big picture for us. Documenting your process right now. If one of the things we noticed is that when we need to help different divisions or have in the past, that understanding how your process works and having it documented, that is also a need to work together to get that down so that when you come back here every year, you're able to follow what you did the prior year. If COVID, again, has not taught us anything else, we don't know what may happen tomorrow and who may or may not be able to make it back to the office immediately. So to be able to have a process documented is essential. 2, categorizing your expenses and maintaining your documentation cannot be cannot be repeated or expressed enough that you're going to need this again. You got to figure out what your expenses are, which are for special ed, what's general, and what needs to be only special ed for this process. Therefore, again, working together is necessary. Separating state and local funds, that's another part of this process. You have to make sure that you keep separate state and what's local, because in this MOE submission, you will need to know each one independently. And then, of course, monitoring and audit. Please understand that at any time you may be asked to, division may be audited or monitored. And if that is the case, you're going to need to make sure you have your process documented, and you're going to need to have maintained all these POs, invoices, all the documentation and backup to be able to support any expenditures that you input for maintenance of effort or allowable exceptions that you've taken. So I think that's enough with the collaboration. So let's move on to talking about accurately categorizing expenditures. As we mentioned in the very beginning, that we're only focused on costs for local and state dollars for maintenance of effort. Many of you got that question right. So hopefully, again, I'm going to say it again. Local and state dollars are the focus, not federal. Federal are excluded from this. And then you have to make sure you separate them, not that they're in total, but we want to make sure you have them separated by state and what's actually local. In addition, you need to make sure that you're not including regular or general education expenses in this process. This should only be special education expenses. Next slide. We want to remind you that capital outlay or regular education services should not be included, especially things such as the American Disabilities Act type expenses. So I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say you were putting in some changing tables. Perhaps that is not something that's just special education. That is probably falling maybe under American Disabilities Act. That should not be included unless it is specifically in an area for special education. Hopefully that makes sense. So that is an example of why you would not have maybe, American Disabilities Act expense in a special education expenditures for MOE. Legally responsible. We get this question a lot. If you are servicing students that are coming into your division from another division, they should not be included in this expense because you are not legally responsible for those students. So that's something that you should not, those people you should not, only the ones that you are legally responsible that are under your division. I want to make sure you understand that we are going to use the ASERFIN to as a basis to compare the expenses that you gave us for MOE. We're going to compare them because they are a baseline for us to understanding what has happened or what has been included, what has been excluded, and then we will allow us to just make sure it's reasonable. It is just a basis. And then we want to remind you also that your expenditures should reflect federal and state definition of special education and related services. So make sure you're following that as your definition. And when we're talking about expenditures for instruction and related services, you need to make sure that for the sole benefit of the provisions needed for the education of students with disabilities, such as mentioned in their IEP. Next slide. So here are a few examples. We receive a lot of questions, so I want to make sure we provide examples where we can as far as what is an allowable expenditure. We talked about salaries and benefits. I want to repeat, benefits are included. Sometimes we receive submissions that do not include benefits, so make sure you include salaries and benefits. And you are also able to submit information for contracted services for when you can't find an individual to replace someone and you need to contract services. And if you have that situation, have a question, please feel free to reach out. But I've listed some of the people, such as, of course, the teachers, aides. You have schools, social workers, medical services for diagnostic, different people that can be included here. Go ahead, next slide. I think we have a few more examples as well. Okay, so we have expenses related for instruction in jail. We want to make sure home-based or homebound instruction services are also included, special education. Of course, certain equipment and constructions are also included, and tuition paid to another division. Now, understand that you paying for your student to go to another division. That is included in those allowable expenses. We provided a nice little worksheet here, so you can see that you may have how you can lay your information out to make sure you're clear on what is actually local, what is state, because we understand some positions might be split and between state funds and local funds. So this is a great visual for you to take on if you're trying to understand how to separate everything out to get it categorized. So next slide. So of course we talked about what's allowable. So we want to make sure we definitely bring up what's not allowable. As I briefly mentioned in a couple slides back, tuition received from another division. So if you have a student coming into your division for whatever reason, and you're receiving tuition, that cannot be counted. General education expenses, they cannot be, teachers, principals, those cannot be counted unless a time and effort documentation is maintained. I want to talk about that because I've seen that actually in my desk reviews, and I want to express the importance of this. If you're saying a principal is spending his or her time working with special education students, if you are not logging that information, keeping track of meetings, and can prove that, then that's probably not something you want to try to include if you're saying they're working in special education. Hopefully that's clear. But in general education, no, should not be included. But if you think you have someone that, or you have someone who's spending it, you need to make sure you can have detailed time and effort documentation maintained. General capital outlay, of course, general transportation and vehicle maintenance, CSA costs, local match cannot be included, and costs that apply to all students. And another example of costs that apply to all students that I can give you is, for example, if the division buys Chromebooks for all students, you do not or cannot decide that you want to use the student's Chromebook expense for special education. No, because you bought that for all the students. However, if there's a unique situation and maybe all the students don't have it, and you need to buy them specifically for special education, that expense might be included. So definitely call us if you have a question. But general costs, no, cannot be included. Next slide. This is a great worksheet to help you and to help us at the same time. We can send this to you if you don't have it. What it does is it helps you lay out your reporting, how you reported expenses on the ASR and how you reported them in the MOE application. It breaks it apart. So when we're going to compare and we're going to ask you to explain what's the difference between the two numbers. This is a very nice spreadsheet that kind of lays it out for you to see it clearly, how they differ and what is included and what is not included. Next slide. All right, data submission. This is where we are today, and this is what we're focusing on again. So let's go ahead and start talking about the system. First of all, we're going to use the IDA Maintenance of Effort web-based application, which is found in the SWS portal. If you don't have access, make sure you get access from your local administrator. The data is to be submitted, and there's a lot of the information from prior year is already calculated in the system. You do not have to worry about that part. You're only focused on the state and local funds that you have for the 21-22 school year. So make sure you have that information available. This application also allows you to see prior years reporting. If you have a need or interest in understanding how the division performed, you will be able to see that by opening up some of those prior year reporting. We have a user manual that we put together for you, and that is available to you in the SOOPS memo. 1, 2, it is located in the instructions section of the IDEA MOE application, and it is also now located in the resource section of the application on your screen. So I have placed that in a few places for you. This is a screenshot. As we're talking about entering the data, I wanted you to see it for yourself. So it's going to display the 2019-2020, and then you're on the right side are going to be entering your 2020-2021 data. I think I said 21-22 before, I'm sorry. It's 2020-2021. So this is just a screenshot to give you a visual of what the application will look like as you input the information. All right, so now we have a, this screen is located in our maintenance of effort guidance document, which gives you a lot of the information that you will be interested in having to understand how this application works, how the calculation works. And this particular screen talks about the subsequent year rule. And this is the year that you're being compared to. Let's take an example real quick. Just look at line 2019-2020 actual expenses. You input as a division for test number 1, $400. The system is going to compare it to the last time that you or your division has met MOE for local funds. The last time it met was at $550. As you can see, there is not an asterisk by that $400 because it did not meet MOE that year for 2019-2020. So we go to the next line over, it says test 2, there's $1,100 there. The last time that for test 2, the division met was at $1,000 for 2017-2018. Therefore, at $1,100, it met MOE. Now, test number 3, $40. I know some of you are like, where did that $40 come back? Because test number 3 is focused on local funds, we go back and look at test number 1. There was $400 input in test number 1. That's your expense that you input as a division. The child count, which is to your far right in the column that says child count, is 10. So $400 divided by 10 is $40. So that is your local funds per capita. When compared to the last time it met, going back to, of course, the last 2 years, thank you, Joanne, $55 was the last time in 2018 that you met. Therefore, $40 you did not meet, and there's not an asterisk there to show you that you did this time. And then in test number 4, same thing. This is state plus local. So it's $110, which is representative of the test 2, where you input $1,100, divided by 10 is $110. So the last time you met was 2017-2018 for $100. So yes, you've met. So real big picture here is for line 2019-2020, you've met 2 tests, test 2 and test 4. You only need to meet 1 test. Good job, division. Good job. So I want to just make sure I point this out. You can find this example on pages 3 and 4. And if you have any questions, I am available to answer those, especially if you have any today. If we have a chance, we're going to try to answer a couple questions if we can. Next screen. This is a screen in the system. This is what you're striving for, division. All 4 tests made, all yeses, you're done. Great job. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen for all of you. So let's go to the next screen and take a look. This might be you. We don't want that to be you, but it might be. And you can see it turns all the, this screen is small, so I recognize it, but you have your guidance document. You can see it up close and personal. But this is a situation where you did not meet any of the 4 tests. And you will need to reach out for some assistance, I'm sure, or possibly use some exceptions because they have not been input at this time. So let's take a look and see, what do we do if we get this screen? All right, exceptions. We're going to talk about exceptions. And one thing I did say in the beginning is if you need them, you use them. You may not need them. So some of you won't have to worry about this. But let's move into talking about exceptions. What are our allowable exceptions? So basically, allowable exceptions are costs that decrease your current year from the actual expenditures from last year. So it takes into consideration what was in this number last year, and you're able to lower it. So let's take a look at, let's go talk about how many exceptions can you take. You can take as multiple exceptions. As long as they apply to this year. You can take more than one. And we're going to talk about the exceptions. So once we start talking about them, you will understand that you may be able to take more than one. And then of course, okay. I think that, yeah, that was pretty much, but go back, Joanne, thank you. That will reduce your level of effort overall. That's what the last bullet was saying. So that it will compare it, and therefore it may allow you to meet maintenance of effort. Yes, the last bullet right there. Sorry about that, guys. Just moving a little fast. Want to make sure we stay on time. Thank you, Joanne. Next slide. So let's talk about the first exception. This one I've seen used the most, to be honest, and it is dealing with voluntary departures. The most important thing I want you to understand, this deals with when divisions have personnel that leave, and we're talking about voluntarily leave and not terminated. So there is an exception to that when there's just cause, but let's go to the next slide and talk about an example so you can see it. So in this case, we talk about a veteran school teacher who has now retired. They make about $150,000 a year. You hire someone new, they make $90,000 a year. The difference between the two is $60,000. That can reduce your level of effort. That amount can be used. So it wouldn't be the whole 90, but it wouldn't be the whole 150, but the difference of the two. This will be an example of a personnel exception that can be used. Next slide. Second type of exception is our decrease in enrollment. The good thing about this is that the system does this one for you. It's a comparison of your December 1 child count against the prior year's December 1 child count. And the system will automatically calculate this. The most important thing I want you to know about this is if you're expecting this decrease in enrollment, look for it and make sure that it actually calculates if you're expecting it. We don't want to make sure the system is working as it should. Next slide. I think we have just a snippet of a screen where this populates and gives you a little information. If it is something that your division actually should see, it will populate and say that you've had this decrease, okay? And we'll go to the next exception, Joanne. Termination, costly students. And this is usually brought about because of a few things that may have happened where a student is no longer in a program or within a division. So usually this will come up if one, the student has left the jurisdiction. Two, let's go to the next slide, Joanne, so they can see that. They've aged out of the obligation of the agency. So that would be another one. And then the last one, they no longer simply need the program. So those are the three reasons why a costly student would be considered as an exception. But what I do want to make sure I clarify is that, again, a costly student is one that is at least 2 to 3 times more than the average cost of a student in the division. So you have to look at it from this standpoint. Let's look at our example. I won't give you an example. Let's look at the example. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so here we go. So in this situation for 2019, you have a student that you're spending $50,000 on for a contracted interpreter. The student leaves the division. So now in 2020, when you're looking don't have this $50,000. This is an exception that you can use to decrease your level of effort. So again, student costs, the program, the interpreter was $50,000. The student leaves. So the expense is no longer there for 2020, 2021. That gives you $50,000 that you could put as a costly program. Thanks. Here's again the system screenshot in the application of where you would input this information. All of this stuff, all of these examples that I'm giving you, they are reviewed closely by myself at the VDOE before they're accepted. But this is what this screenshot you can see down below. We list those 3 examples that I've already given you. And this one would be there for the prior example if it was input. Next screen. Decrease in costly expense. This has to do with equipment or construction, for example, that long-term expenses that are being retired. This would be an example of where you would put that. Construction projects or like vehicles, right here is where you would find those buses that you bought maybe 1 year and didn't have that expense for another. So let's take a look at the example that we have. Construction costs. Okay, so we had some construction costs that were taking place. If you have those construction costs, remember that you cannot take the entire construction cost because they're only a percentage is related probably to special education. So we have to look at that when we're talking about construction costs. These type of expenses are looked at by a case-by-case basis. So we do not be surprised if you're asked additional information as we deal with these type of expenses. Next slide. So in this case, there's a 2-year construction contract and renovation project. And for year 1, $70,000 was the expense. Year 2, $100,000. When it came to year 3, there was not an expense there. The LEA is able to take $100,000 for its year 3 when in to reduce its level of effort. And this would come up again when you're looking at the fact that you didn't meet, you want to put in an exception, it would be year 2, not year 1, but year 2, because that is the comparison year, the look back. You're not looking back at year 1, you're looking back in year 3, you're looking back at year 2. So that's why it will be the $100,000 and not the 70. So, all right, our last exception, adjustment to local fiscal effort in certain years. And this has to do with if your division in this annual allocation from 1 year to the next, to the previous year, has an increase. The LEA may reduce its level of expenditures otherwise required by, but not more than 50% of the amount of the excess. Now, this one is probably the most confusing. Understand, we're going to be closely monitoring and reviewing all of these exceptions, but this is one that you really cannot do a lot with without reaching out to us at the VDOE. But let's take a look at it a little bit closer. Okay, so this example here has a couple components to it that are circumstances that take place. So you had an increase in your allocation from 1 year to the next. We want to make sure that you understand that the LEA may reduce the level of local or state and local expenditures otherwise required to meet MOE by up to 50%. I said that before. I do not believe you have to use the entire 50%. That's why it says up to 50%. The amount that is freed up must be used for ESSA. Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, and it looks like ESEA 4. Okay. So next slide. Another component that we want to draw your attention to. You will need to provide evidence of how you demonstrate, evidence how you use the funds that were spent, because we just said you have to use the funds that are freed up for ESSA. So we're going to be looking for proof. That's another component of this that has to be adhered to. The funds can supplement, not supplant. the activity of cost in the year of the reduction. And then if you are on and have the 15%, you're voluntarily giving the 15% for coordinated early intervening services, you can take this exception. The reason I'm bringing this up, because if it's the other way, you're not going to be able to take this exception. So those are some of the circumstances that are around using this particular exception. Let's take a look at an example. So it's a little bit, like I said, it's probably the most confusing. So you have $800,000, that was your 611 allocation for 2017. 2018, you have 900. So there's that increase that we were talking about. The difference in the increase is $100,000. You can take up to 50% of that, which is $50,000, to reduce your level of effort if you meet all the conditions in that year, okay? So let's take a look at why you cannot use this. So if a division is, if a division is presently unable to establish and maintain programs under FAPE, as the SEA determines, which is VDOE, then, or is under action, the state has taken action against the LEA, according to 616, section 616, you will not be able to take this. 2, if your local determination is needs assistance, needs intervention, or needs substantial intervention, you will not be able to take this exception. And last, as I was trying to say before, if you are required to set aside 15% for CCEIS, due to significant disproportionality, you will not be able to take this particular exception. Again, this particular exception is one that you will work closely with the VDOE to take. If there's any questions, concerns, don't worry about it. We will work with you. All right, and the last part about this, this is just a special note. When we're talking about an increase in your allocation, for the year that we are reviewing, we're talking, this was when you received the CARES Act, 2020, 2021. The CARES Act funds are not considered an increase in your allocation. So if you were thinking, oh, we might be able to do that because we had the increase due to the CARES funds. No, you will not be able to use this exception because those funds are not considered an increase in your federal allocations. And ARP is not even in consideration during this time period. Next slide. And I think we're doing pretty good. All right, so what happens if you're not in compliance? So let's talk about non-compliance. I hate to have this discussion because I want you all to meet, but I know we have to. So if you do all of the things I discussed, you've input the information, you've went through, and you still do not meet, call me. Kind of like do not pass go. We need to get together to take a deeper dive and make sure we've covered everything to help you meet MOE. If we do the work and you still do not pass, then this is what's going to happen next. You're going to be asked to repay the federal government the amount in which the division failed to maintain effort. You will be required to repay the VDOE. And you cannot use federal funds to pay back this money. So you can't use federal funds, you have to use non-federal funds, obviously. And then a school division will not receive an IDA sub-grant if it does not budget at least as much as it's spent in the most recent year. So I want, most recent year it met MOE. And I want to bring this up because you're still responsible from the eligibility standpoint to budget the same amount that the last time you met. So you don't, that is not overlooked. You're not waived to go past that part. No, that's still going to be a requirement. All right. So the last part to this, excuse me, the last part is I need to remind you that because MOE is so different than the PSA and the excess cost application, it is not a process in which you submit it and you're done, and then you pass it on to your superintendent we do want to just remind you that there's going to be a lot of back and forth. And when we get to the final part of the final approval through email, then we tell you to go ahead and submit it for verification. Please make sure that your superintendent approve it through the SDCA system, okay? We want to make sure that that is not missed. I can't, if you write yourself a big note, to follow it all the way through and make sure that part gets done. All right, here we are at the end. Just to kind of go back and make sure we've checked all the boxes. We want you to use the resources that we gave you. I'm a resource, but we also have a list following this presentation in the back of it that we're going to share with you, just reminding you to use your user guides, your user application guide, using the guidance document for MOE. In addition, if you have any questions around COVID, we've included those resources as well in the back of this presentation for a reference for you. Make sure you use that information. Collaborate. Work with your finance department, work with your accounting department. Make sure you guys get together to make sure you're categorizing your local and state expenses and making sure they're separated by local and state. I want to remind you that the IDA MOE application is pre-populated for you already. All you need to do is add the state funds and the local funds, and the system will do the rest. You're striving to pass all 4 methods, but remember, you only need to pass 1. Exceptions, use the allowable exceptions if needed. If you don't need them, you don't have to use them. All right, and please plan to ensure that your division budgets and expends enough local and state dollars to maintain eligibility and compliance. Overarching of the whole MOE presentation, you're always trying to make sure you meet both standards. The eligibility standard, remember, that's during the springtime with when you're doing your annual application, and your compliance. Here we are right here in December. We're focused on that. And then the verification process, make sure you understand how everything is going back and forth, and that your superintendent does his or her final step to approve. The deadline is January 31st, 2020. Please be advised that if you submit it to me on January 29th, I'm not going to be probably able to flip it back to you, and you'll hear right back from me, because there might be some in front of you for me to review. So this takes a little bit longer than our other submissions for me to go through, but I'm asking you, please submit. Hopefully by us doing some work early in August, having 1 presentation already, that has helped many of you prepare for this time period where we are here now. All right, I think that's it, other than doing a knowledge check to see if we've improved our scores and we're at 100%. And I think there's been some questions. I don't know if Tracy has jumped in and grabbed those, but let's see, we'll take the poll, and if we have a minute, we're 2, we will see if we can answer any questions that has been asked that we have not been able to get to yet thus far. Joanne, you ready?
Sure. I'm going to bring the poll up now. You'll be glad to know that there's only 4 questions in the post-test. So I'm launching it, and if you would certainly take it, that would be most helpful. It'll take a while for it all to compute, so I'm hoping that everybody can see it. I see some folks starting to use it, so that's wonderful. Looks like we've changed some minds about this. We have about 64 out of 119. About 67% of the individuals have completed the poll. 71. It should be a lot shorter and a lot quicker. %, 85 of the 117 people participating have completed the poll. Okay, I think we've got 75%, so we're doing pretty good. I'm going to count back to 1 from 5 and we'll cut the poll off. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're done with 76% participating. Here are our responses. Number 1, we increased that, and the answer to that is an eligibility and compliance requirement. MOE requires both of those. You only are submitting data about MOE compliance right now. The eligibility component is done through the annual plan. Those that marked only compliance or eligibility, please get in touch with us so that we can further discuss it with you. Almost everyone got number 2 right. Maintenance effort only includes state and local expenses. Let me see. Number 3, who should work together to submit the MOE? It needs to be, it's a collaboration between the finance department and the special education department. So please take heed of that for that individual that didn't understand that. You need to make those collaboration efforts. And we really appreciate that it's confirming that you're going to meet MOE. And we have 2 school divisions that feel they may not make it. And we have, 61% or 54 feel very hopeful after this presentation. So we appreciate that. Those of you who feel like you're definitely not going to meet it, please begin to contact Shalonda so that she can help you right away. And we appreciate you sharing your responses to the poll, and I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. We have some things for you to remember. Please note that the collection window opens December 3rd. It did open, and it closes on January 10th, 2022. Referred to the November 22nd, 2021 email from Dr. Sam Hollins for the sign in for the Q&A questions that will be on January 10th, Monday at 11 a.m. and January 20th, Thursday at 1 p.m. Please also remember that we'll be doing some more training coming up on the annual plan. That will be in January on the 11th. And for more information, please feel free to always contact us at our SPED email address or Shalonda Lewis at her email address and phone number. Just for your information behind that, we want to say thank you, how much we appreciate all that you do each and every day. And these are some additional resources that will be available to you on the PowerPoint, but we're not going to go over them right now. So that's the end of our presentation, and I am going to stop the recording now, and we will go over the questions in the chat box. So